This guitar's a little stinker, but I had to have this one. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Tonight we're going back to the late 60s, early 70s to document another one of the Low-Impedance series guitars. This is known as the Les Paul Professional. This model was first introduced in September of 1969, right around the time that the Les Paul came back. Because after roughly 1960 or so, the Les Paul took a break until 1968 as kind of a 56-inspired gold top as well as the Les Paul Custom. But Les wanted to design something a little bit more akin to his tastes at that time, and that was low-impedance style pickups. So you had this model, the Les Paul Professional, then you have this one, the Les Paul Personal. This is the fancy boy. It got the ebony fretboard, inlays, all basically like a Les Paul Custom. But it has the very unique feature of an XLR for a microphone on the upper bow. You've got gold hardware instead of chrome, multi-banded binding versus single ply, having binding on the back of the body versus not having it, trapezoid inlays on rosewood board versus the ebony with the custom blocks, being true mother of pearl versus your regular acrylic stuff over here. And your headstocks are vastly different. This has a whole peg head veneer put onto it, whereas this is actually a pantographed logo. And sometimes they will just completely fall off, but there's no binding along the headstock of our professional friend. Now, if you're wondering about the truss rod cover, yeah, I'm sorry. I probably wouldn't have bought this had I realized it. Somebody's replaced that with a blank one. Originally, it would have looked like this. But this is the time when Gibson was getting squirrely with the specs, so you got things like pancake bodies and volutes going on. But this is the very beginning of that, so sometimes they're rather small. You got to be looking for them. I believe this one should be from the year 1970. But also note the tuners. It's a way different style. Basically a Gibson branded Grover style made by Schaller. But those two models only lasted until about 1972 when the Les Paul Recording comes out, which is a beautiful marriage between these two models to make them better, more succinct. Because the whole thing with the low-impedance electronics is the fact that they are ridiculously clean and clear. Les liked it because he could plug them directly into his recording interfaces and just be able to go. I even had a commenter reach out on that last video saying you can plug these directly into a radio and things like that. There's many different uses, but this was mainly for recording, and that's where the second namesake came from. But the Professional and Pro actually had to have an impedance line transformer to use it with a regular amplifier. And hey, that's new this episode. We actually have the official one right here. It's got the Gibson branding. It's very common for people to modify these to just incorporate that within here, but that's what the Les Paul Recording did. They actually just get a little switch here so you can go between high and low impedance. History aside, the Les Paul Professional, while being a kind of an uncommon guitar nowadays, it's not very desirable to most players because low impedance electronics, they have a very niche market. They are good, and it does what it's supposed to do very well. However, the Les Paul Recording is a much better instrument, and it's not super big. As in our last episode of the Personal, we actually took the dimensions that you can see here. As compared to a regular Les Paul, it's between 1 and 1.5 inches additional in each dimension. And we were just talking, these are solid mahogany backs and tops with the pancake lamination layer. They are heavy. 12 to 13 pounds is not uncommon for this model. And with them being a little bit more plentiful on the market as compared to the Personal, in the 70s and 80s, people would pick these things up relatively cheap and modify them heavily. Now, sometimes it was, hey, let's route it out for humbuckers. People would do that to the recordings as well. Or there actually is a famous user of the Les Paul Professional, Jan Akkerman of Focus. You know, Hocus Pocus Focus? You might not even recognize his guitar, but pay close attention to where the fretboard meets the neck. You're going to see the same sliced design making way for the original low-impedance electronics. Now, I know for a fact his is retopped and refinished, and there have been copycats out there who have wanted a guitar similar to his that do it. I would imagine he also had it chambered out at the same time, but I don't know that for sure. But there you go. If you're ever wondering what that guitar was, it's a Les Paul Professional. Well, at least that's what I was thinking all these years, but no, looking closer at these photos, that actually appears to be a Les Paul Personal. What a power move to modify one of those, because look, you got the back binding, you've got the ebony fretboard. I was always always just thinking that that was part of the conversion process and he fancied it up a bit, but if you look closely, it does appear to say Les Paul Personal on that truss rod cover. However, it appears he has more than one of these, or maybe it's gone through multitudes of changes over the years. But today, if you want to make a tribute to that guitar, please don't chop up a Les Paul Personal. Chop up one of these. Way more readily available and less expensive. So in today's day and age, this is mainly a collector's piece, or for somebody who wants something a little bit out of the ordinary and different. Like, it's got quirky vintage charm. It's probably the cheapest 69 or early 70s Les Paul that you can buy. So some people like them for that little fact. But I told you this one was a little stinker. I do have a little bit of a story of how I fell in love with this particular one and the journey it put me through. I was first contacted about this example on January 4th of 2025. He had just saw that Les Paul Darkfire episode. Everybody wanted to buy that thing from me. Not because they like robot guitars, but because that top is particularly fantastic. But I had to tell him, sorry, not looking to get rid of the Darkfire. And then he thought, well, what about the Charlie Star Jr.? So I told him what I could do on all that, and I don't think he liked the trade-in value, so we just ended up working out a PayPal deal, which was great because I was planning on doing the Les Paul Personal review soon. So I thought, hey, having both at the same time, that might not be bad. So I send the money, but I see it says unclaimed, and usually that means it's a brand new PayPal account. Things aren't properly set up yet. So I let him know about that, and then he was saying PayPal wants a 21-day hold on the funds, but I told him, well, you have to ship it first, give them a tracking number. Usually it's not the full 21 days, but that's just how PayPal is. So he ended up denying those funds and sending me like a proper invoice. And that time, everything looked good. There was no unclaimed status. It showed as sent. It was in his account. He just had to wait for it. But then the next morning, I see my payment got refunded again. So I didn't know if he was working out PayPal issues, or maybe he didn't like their terms, maybe he had a change of heart, but I just got completely ghosted on this thing. But I didn't want to lose hope in case it was for legitimate reasons. So after I reviewed the personal video on January 31st, I reached out to him again saying, hey, are we doing anything here, or have we moved on? But it was February 4th where I see Chicago Music Exchange lists this guitar. And I was like, dang it. I knew there was probably something like that. Not gonna lie, CME pays fantastically and they probably had better payment terms. I just wish the guy would have told me that, hey, sorry, found a better buyer. So anyways, from there, reach out to CME, bite the bullet. Now it's here. Generally speaking, I don't really like the Professional that much, but this particular one with this ringy eye grain formation, I thought if I have to have one of these in my collection, I want it to be unique for a certain reason and speak to me, and this particular example does. So I had to pay about $1,000 more for it than I would have liked to. I'm really bummed I didn't notice the truss rod cover before it's too late. But the other thing I liked about this one is the fact that the logo isn't flaking off, because that's another big deal to me. This one actually is in phenomenal shape. I mean, these dings right here are kind of a bummer, but you kind of got to live with it to have the unique eye wood grain formation. And in general, that's what the Personal and Professional models do really well. They have this really old growth mahogany that they used on here. So even in the more plainer bits with this really dark walnut finish, it's just so gorgeous. Like, if you appreciate wood grain, that's another reason why you might pick one of these over, say, a Les Paul recording. They're still good in their own right, but these, they were using a slightly different wood stock on. Now let's take a second to appreciate the case. This is the original one. It's very common for these things to get misplaced or used to restore a higher end guitar like a Personal, but they have this cool golden interior. They've got an additional block up here of foam to help keep the guitar in place as well as right there. This one's actually missing its original handle, but it does still have the original pull tab, and then you can see this cool like gator skin like interior here. Then the outside of the case also matches a very similar look. At first when I pulled this out, I thought it was an aftermarket case, because my Personal didn't have that, but I believe that one's a 1971-ish, so they did change them later on. But you can see things like the wedge always stays the same, but the interior color does vary. But that goldenrod yellow is just such a iconic late 60s, early 70s hue. And now we can appreciate both of the original low-impedance models side by side. We'll have to get a real deal Les Paul recording first and second version on the show, but I'm glad to have a beautiful set of the originals. So let's go ahead and throw this one onto the workbench, take an individual look at its parts and specs, but let's begin that journey now. We're actually going to start on the headstock tonight because a miracle happened. I went and looked through the original guy's photos, and sure enough, it did have it at that point in time. But when it made it to CME, somewhere between then and their listing process, it seems to have lost the cover. And I was really bummed about this, but when I took it off, you guys aren't going to believe it. They just put it on upside down. I've never been so happy for an error like that. I might think it's irrational to be so worked up over a truss rod cover, but you gotta remember, the early 70s are so special because they actually engraved them rather than silk screening. So you've got a black layering, but through the use of the pantograph machine, they carved through that black layer to reveal the white. And that super fancy font that they used, it's just beautiful. And something else to keep in mind, this does not have a Les Paul model silk screen on it because they put Les Paul on the truss rod cover. You would only find that on like the Triumph base, some early Les Paul Customs, the Les Paul Professional, the Les Paul Personal, and on the first run of Les Paul Deluxe. It's just a cool early 70s thing. But I also noticed something else interesting about these tuners. They're Fender style. The what I call vintage poke it down, wrap it around style tuners. They're the slotted heads. That is very bizarre. I had never noticed that before today. But there's an up close look at our almost perfect Gibson logo on this one. And I say almost perfect simply because I can't actually see anything wrong with it, but I'm sure there might be something. And good news, our truss rod's not maxed out and appears to adjust just fine. But we can see, some stand rash on either side of the neck. But we'll look at that more on the back side. But our bone net measures about 1.71 inches, increasing to 2.08 at the 12th, with the first fret neck depth of 0.86 and a surprising 1.06 by the 12th. It's definitely more of a C shape, and yeah, sure enough, as you go up here, it does get ridiculously huge, but it's not like 50s baseball bat territory necessarily. It's just big and rounded, but you're starting to get to the heel. But sure enough, by the 9th, you are at 1. Here that is on the contour gauge, 1st fret and 12th fret. I went ahead and cleaned our fretboard and polished our frets. You can definitely see a lot of flattening and wear areas, but what's very strange is it looks like somebody did a spot level job but then didn't bother to re-crown. That's especially evident up here on our top frets because it's like, yeah, nice and rounded and then flat, 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 flat. Thanks. Somebody definitely didn't play too high up, so they didn't really care about that. They just wanted to make sure that there were no buzzings. But as is usual in this era, you don't have much fret height to them at all. However, as compared to the Les Paul Customs out of this era, I would say I think this fret wire is a little bit wider, but you've got your acrylic trapezoid inlays with the rosewood board on this one. And the scale length is the same, 24 3/4 inches, and I measure a 12-inch fretboard radius. Now let's move over to the body. I was so excited when I found the original truss rod cover just upside down. I decided to give this thing the full deep clean and polish. It definitely deserved it. I did notice something different here. Do you see how this pickup ring is attached? It actually sits slightly underneath your toggle switch rubber grommet and plate. That's kind of bizarre. And when I was removing it, I was very careful, but when I had pressed it down, somehow this worked its way under there. And when I lifted it up again, unfortunately, it kind of cracked. That's unfortunate. So my suggestion to you, if you're ever working on one of these, pick it up from this side. That way you can feel if it's catching on something before it's too late. As far as the pickup routes themselves, right in here you can see your transitional neck tenon, as well as where the neck joins into our mahogany body right there. But this one has not been modified or routed for humbuckers or anything. The back side of the pickup looks like so. It's epoxy coated, and I was actually reading on a comment, on a different video mind you, so if anyone else also knows this, please chime in. Apparently, these were made by EMG before they were called EMG. So if anybody has any more documented history on that, I would be interested in reading more. But these are definitely a long way from what we know of EMGs today. But the outside of the pickup does have the Gibson embossing. I don't know if embossing's technically correct on this one because it technically stands proud, but it gives you that Gibson flair that they were doing around 72. And the chrome brackets certainly have their own look, but our bridge pickup cavity is more of the same. And you can see that little route that they put on through the body, so that's interesting. So since this is a pancake body, it technically has a top about this thick, so like normal, so you can kind of say this has a mahogany top and a mahogany back. And in fact, right there you can actually see the maple layer exposed. So it looks like maybe before they put the bodies together, they do that route to run all your wires through. But just for the sake of completeness, here's the back side of the bridge. But speaking of bridges, this is pre-Nashville, so we still have the ABR1 installed on everything post-mounted. But being a late 60s, early 70s model, you actually get stock nylon saddles. And here's the backside of that bridge, Gibson patent number. That is an error correct part. It's very rounded over here, and it is the wire retainer version. But our tailpiece is the error correct lightweight aluminum one. You can see our casting mark on the back. And as far as the controls, it's very similar to the Personal, where your volume is self-explanatory. Turn your sound on and off. Your decade is basically a programmable high-pass filter. You have 11 different positions that gives you a different capacitor within the circuit. So it kind of makes it go from open to closed. It's kind of interesting. There are some good tones out of that. And then you've got treble and bass, which rolls off your trebles and the bass. So kind of like a tone control, just a little bit more advanced. And then with our faceplate off here, we can see our different options. For when this guy is in the middle position, you can choose in and out of phase for a quackier tone. And then tone selector is not really a tone selector. It tells you what is within the circuit. I believe 1 has the fanciness out, 2 puts the fanciness back in, and then 3 we'll have to figure out on the playing demo, because I remember the last time we had documented that, it sounded a little bit different than what the internet was saying. But you've got your Pilgrim topper hat for that switch. And don't miss your pointers. So to know where you are, they actually had Gibson put these like thumbtack inserts in the body. But you can see our single ply binding. I just feel this model works so much better when it has multiply and one on the back. These are just quite clunky looking. It's definitely very prototype-like. And I was curious, are these bodies actually smaller because we don't have to have the output jack for our XLR mic? And no, it's still measured the exact same. So you're good there, but here you can really take in that eye wood grain formation. And unfortunately, after cleaning it, these dings became way more apparent, but hey, that's just how it goes sometimes. But all things considered, this thing is not in too bad of condition now that it's been cleaned. There is a lot of finish checking on it, but you gotta get it in the light just right to see it. But now let's flip over to the back. Things are looking pretty good back here. You can see something kind of marred it up back here. It almost looks like maybe one of those coily cables. And the reason I say that, because that's definitely what did that right here. Sometimes they would leave it in the case and they would be non-nitro safe and they would react to the finish. Other times it could just be a button on your shirt or a belt buckle. Something scratches, leaves indents and impressions. But hey, from being from 1970, it's not in too bad a shape. Maybe not as fun of wood grain patterns back here until you get right here. You get like a little ghosty guy with 2 eyes and his spooky sheet. But now let's dive into our electronics. The best way to date a early 70s guitar is not by its serial number. This means almost nothing. It's by your pot codes. And this one reads as the 18th week of 1970. This one matches that. And you'll just have to trust me that this one does too, because you gotta look at it at an angle. Well, there you go. Maybe you can see it too. So that means that is the earliest possible date that this guitar could have been made, but most likely sometime in 1970 is when this one was produced and then those pots were put in here. But the magic comes from all your capacitors and resistors, etc. in here. They just have them all over, and that works within your circuit, because remember, you've got your 3 tone selections here that dictate what is in each circuit. And this is your decade rotary switch. As you turn it, you can see it selects the different ones to put within the circuit. Then you've got your treble and bass roll off over here. It's not as complicated as a robot guitar, but they definitely have a lot of stuff in here. But to piggyback on what I was talking about in the pickup cavities, here you can see the 2 pieces of mahogany and that maple center lamination. So it looks like the top piece they route out before they glue onto the body, right before that maple stripe. That's a very good visualization of that. And here you can see where some of the walnut staining dripped into our cavity. I thought this was cool, a 3-ply output jack cover. Those are always fancy looking, and it's a miracle that it survived. But we've got our regular strap button down here, and another one up here. And we technically have thin binding in the cutaway, but since it's not a maple top, you don't see anything outside of your maple just barely poking through. I mean, they really stained that dark so you wouldn't really even notice. Now, it is common to get some finish checking along your pancake body. You can see that right there. The only time you would need to worry is if you can fit a business card or something in between the pieces, because that means they're really coming apart. Something like this example, that's just natural light movement. But man, the cutaway on this just looks so strange without binding. Even from the front, that's kind of the case. This multi-banded one just looks better. Makes it look a little bit less out of place. Whereas without it, you can really see how bulbous that actually is. But we just have a regular toggle switch plate on this particular one, because we don't have to make room for any of those other microphone electronics or pots. That just looks like so. But the other plate looks about the same to me. Now we can run up the backside of the neck. You can see there's a couple of nicks and dings on it. Nothing too overly excessive though. And here you can see some of that nitro burning stand rash along the edge. Nothing you can do about it once you have it. But thankfully no breaks, cracks, or repairs here, because that is common on these too. You find a broken one and then it'll quickly get modified. But the thing about these Gibson branded Schaller Grover style tuners, the Personal got the fancy waffle backs, but they just didn't stand the test of time. These are a little bit better than them. They still seem to function quite nicely. So in many ways, as a player, you might prefer these if you want to have 100% stock original equipment. But our serial number is stamped on this one, 909042. Let's do a blacklight test real quick. I don't even see any sweat absorption areas. I mean, outside of those dings, this is actually very well maintained. Even our pickups are glowing quite cool. All of our knobs are appearing to match. I didn't want to say anything, but I was kind of scared of this headstock that maybe it was resprayed at one point in time. But no, this is a survivor. I did see some minor finish checking on the Gibson logo, and it looks like maybe a small ding on the top. But that's one of the cleanest headstocks I've seen on one of these. And that's another reason why I wanted this one, even if it's not 100% perfect back here. But from a blacklight standpoint, it is. This helps you see those dings on the back side of the neck a little bit better as well. We'll take a close look over here because sometimes headstock breaks can hide, but I think we're good. And besides a few dings at the top of the neck, nothing to report over here either. Then the edges of the body look good. This is just a very nice example. All said and done, how much does this chunk of mahogany weigh? I wasn't lying to you. 12 pounds, 3 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this one sounds. All right, so this one, number 3, takes all the fanciness out of the circuit, and this is just a regular pickup selector. So we're gonna start our demo on position 3. I would say this thing has some awesome clean tones. Really like that in-between position. They work together so well. But the bridge isn't so bad either. Now we'll move into tone position number 2, which brings these back into the circuit. So we'll just do a basic chord so you can hear the decade knob. So a full on 10 gives you that kind of throatier sound. Whereas all the way down to 0 gives you a slightly thinner tone. And you can get anywhere in between. I've always found on these low impedance series guitars, it's the neck pickup that is most responsive to all these controls down here. So we'll do that same test on the neck pickup now. Now with both pickups together, we'll try the treble roll-off. Now we'll try our bass roll-off. Needless to say, that bass roll-off, not what we normally have. The treble is pretty much a regular tone position, just a little bit different. Less muddiness to it, but that bass roll-off is so different. And you can use both together to do whatever you want. Then don't forget about your decade knob if you wanted that to be thinner at the same time. These are really something that's great for a clean player that wants to tinker a little bit and have a lot of usable tones. There's a reason why Les says you could use these for recording, because they do a lot. You just have to sit down, take a minute to understand the controls, get your transformers and everything, and then you can have a lot of fun, even with just the neck pickup. Now, as far as position 1 on this particular one, it sounds like the decade knob is doing something, it's just not as extreme. So my best advice, stick to the middle position and then everything works. Thus far, everything we've done has been in phase, but out of phase sounds like this. Now, if you missed my last personal episode and you're asking yourself, can you distort these pickups? The answer is yes, but no. Like, they don't take it like a normal guitar. They just kind of get like a drive to them. And as you can notice, the ambience of my amp doesn't really like it. You start to get a lot of noise. And in many ways, I would say this guitar stays even cleaner. This is my usual rock tones all dialed in. Kind of starts to sound like a Telecaster. There is something between this one and the personal. I would suggest checking out that episode if you want to hear these distorted. There must be something different with the Gibson line transformer. This doesn't seem to work well with my pedal because it's very quiet now. So we'll use this segment to answer a new question. What happens if you don't have the transformer in the circuit? Well, it's kind of like what I was just saying. The guitar still works in a normal amp. It's just quiet. So if you're running into the issue of your guitar's quiet through your amp, it's because you need the high to low impedance. But you still will get sound. And you technically can just turn your amp up really loud. Normally I have it at about 3. Here it is at 10. This would be destroying my ears with a regular guitar, but here we go with this. So technically you don't need the transformer in a roundabout way if you're just a player. But it makes things a lot easier if you want to keep your settings consistent. Because heaven forbid if you would forget to change that back before you plug in a normal guitar. So there we go, the Gibson Les Paul Professional from 1970. What are my final thoughts on this thing? Usually, if somebody's going to try one of the first generation low impedance guitars, this is the most easily attainable one. And I've got to say, never had a high opinion of these as far as how they feel to play, because they're so much larger than a regular Les Paul. They're really heavy. Now that said, on a strap, it actually did feel kind of comfortable because it's well balanced. It's not too body heavy or too neck heavy, but these are definitely the black sheep within Gibson's history of the low impedance series, because everybody knows the recording, everybody knows the personal because of the fun little microphone thing up here, but a lot of people forget about the professional because it's basically just outdated vintage technology at this point. However, the tones are fantastic if you're looking for cleans. The only reason these didn't sell as well as Les and Gibson were hoping is simply because in the 70s, people were ready to distort things and have some fun in that aspect. But if you're a jazzy guy, or you just want to practice getting good at playing guitar and you want to force yourself to stay clean so you can actually practice and hear how good you are, not hiding behind distortion, that's when one of these things might come in handy. So I hope you enjoyed, learned something new, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow on the next one. Take care.